And in those 50 areas, no matter what they were, and they range from the economy itself, to national security, to energy, to the development program, the social development program, and all of these things, every single one of them has its life and its livelihood based on the success of the work of the Minister of Finance and the country's resource base. And one of the reasons why we had to do this is to ensure that we keep our feet on the ground and our expectations close to our skull, understanding that the country's resource base is not as bountiful as it was in an earlier time, and therefore decision making going forward, while we are quite happy with how we have been able to bounce back after the COVID lockdown and shutdown and economic contractions and so on. We are very happy in the way the country has bounced back. But as we motor along into the future, we have to keep our eyes on the speed limit, because every citizen in this country, not just the cabinet, but every citizen in this country ought to be aware that the country's resource base is not what it used to be at our peak earnings of, say, 2007, 2008. A lot of water has flowed under the bridge. And what the Ministry of Finance did was to make a presentation to the Cabinet showing how we have charted the course from 2014 to now. And when you look at it graphically, it stands out what we have been coping with, what we have been able to do, and where that graph is now, where the gradient on that graph is now. And this ought to be of interest to the population. And as a result of that, it's not only the cabinet that we are wanting to educate on that, we want to educate the population. So sometime in the not too distant future, immediately after the budget, which is due in the coming weeks, one of the things I propose to do is, alongside the Minister of Finance, we will do a spotlight on the economy. You may recall that before the government embarked on engaging the oil companies, we had a spotlight on energy, where all the stakeholders came, and I think we were at the Hyatt, I think it was, and we presented to the country, especially the stakeholders, the facts of our situation. And we were able to get a lot of public information out, because many people in this country are not connected to what goes on away from their own personal interests. You go to work, you get paid, you have a business, you sell your product, you go to church, and so on. But many people, some people even do not want to engage the origins of those things which impact them so seriously, for fear that they may not like what they see or what they hear. But we believe that the government will do well to have this spotlight on the economy at this stage, so that we could discuss where we've been, where we are, and where we're going, and what we could go, and indicate where there are issues, how we are treating with those issues that will arise in the analysis of our circumstances. We remain an economy that is heavily dependent on the fortunes of the hydrocarbon sector, oil, gas, petrochemicals, in different ratios. And that gas is LNG, petrochemicals rely on natural gas, and we're still producing as many barrels of oil as we can. And of course, that being so, we are guided and influenced and affected by the international marketplace, because the pricing of those products are not set by us. We operate with them in the international marketplace. And that is why we rely on the Minister of Finance to discuss with the Cabinet the projections going forward for the gas market, the petrochemical market, and of course the oil, the crude oil market. And against the best advice and the experts' projections for those products, we are able to have an idea, a fairly good and workable idea as to what it holds for Trinidad and Tobago. And that then gives us an idea as to what we can do in sustaining what we are into, or improving or increasing where we might need to, or being cautious and careful where we have to. So that was the foundation on which this retreat was based, sitting on what the Minister of Finance could show us as the projections for the future meaning the next 3 to 5 years, but of course starting with the first year, which is the next budget going forward. And that being so, we then come to the point of how do we fuel this economy. And we were very pleased to be treating with the fact that our non-oil sector, when you look at the data, the actual data, contrary to what you might hear, our non-oil sector is doing very well. And if you put the petrochemical sector in the non-oil sector, as it is put in some discussions, we have been able to see significant inflows with respect to the petrochemical sector for a short period of time when the market was very good. But we also had to be warned that the market has now resorted to the kinds, almost to the kinds of levels that they were prior to the high prices that we experienced in 2022 on the petrochemical side. So we had to literally discuss that and see what we do in the context of a return to prices that are much in the order of the 2018, 2019 prices, where they're pretty much heading. And when we do that, we can then now determine what policies we will sustain. And then we dealt with all the ministries as to what their priorities would be, best case, worst case scenarios. And of course, against the background that whatever we do, we need to have a development program, because that development program is where a lot of the short-term employment is supported by people who engage in the projects that are funded by the development program. So we have to have a development program, and it does look like if we will still maintain a deficit budget, and from that budget we have to determine how we treat with our debt and our levels of borrowing. So those discussions are the kinds of discussions that take place in a cabinet retreat where the entire cabinet is present, and we literally prioritize what goes where based on how much we have. Because at the end of the day, we are governed by certain principles. If you're going to borrow, you have to be able to repay. If you're going to spend, you have to earn. And we look at the spending and we look at the earnings. And there are two issues that jump to the fore now in the national conversation. One is the high level of violent crime, notwithstanding that some other elements of crime might be subsiding, but what really attracts our attention and is of greatest concern to us is the high level of violent crime. It gives us no pass to say that it is something that is being experienced throughout the region and the wider world. But we are having to focus on our situation in a way that others have to focus on theirs. We have highlighted this ourselves, and we were analyzing to see what effect our recent actions have had. I can tell you that in the reportings that can be made by the various ministers, in this case the Minister of National Security, we have seen some considerable progress in the work that we set out to do with the United States, And you may recall when we raised the level of our presentation from a national consultation on crime as a public health issue, we raised it with the encouragement of CARICOM to having a CARICOM issue. And much of what went on at that symposium had to do with encouraging the United States as the supplying market for the firearms that are very plentiful in our country, that we need additional support on the outside. I can tell you that the relationship between Trinidad and Tobago and the United States on this matter has never been better. For quite a while we didn't have an ambassador in Trinidad and Tobago from the United States, and while the Charge d'Affaires had done yeoman service in helping us to connect with Washington and elsewhere, the coming of a new ambassador allowing us almost direct contact with the agencies in the United States, we are in fact making some progress, and I am confident that while I will not make any projections or predictions, I am confident that the work that we are doing now with the assistance of external parties, that we would eventually get the better of the criminal elements which have been seeking to expand their reaches in Trinidad and Tobago. One of the things that has happened is that in recent times, at the urgings of the leadership of CARICOM, where Trinidad and Tobago stands, with our colleagues, is that the United States has listened with respect to us saying that you have a bigger role to play as a supplier, especially one that had literally encouraged the commercialization of handguns to others who will buy it. But now, a law has been passed in the United States not too long ago, where illegal trafficking in firearms, and of course this is where we have a great interest, is now a federal crime. And what that means, any person who engages in that crime now will be exposed to the resources and the activities and the interests of all the United States agencies, and there are many of them with a lot of resources, a lot of personnel, and right now a lot of interest in what those people have been doing to us and by us. So we are very pleased that that is now in operation, and we expect to see the fruits of that in the not too distant future. We also have been receiving a lot of training in the recent past, and of course, as you know, we are sharing information now much more than ever, and we are going to have our vetted units who will have greater access to support and information and following the criminal activities than we were doing before. So those are some of the outcomes of the whole question of lifting the crime fight to the things to do that you would have heard at the National Symposium on Crime. Within our border, we are taking steps, actively taking steps at the moment, to suppress some of the growth areas that sustain some of the crime that we're facing, not the least of which is our prison. We know for a fact that a lot of the killings that have been taking place have their origins on instructions and participation from people who are already incarcerated. We are taking steps to ensure that our prison play a lesser role. It is not everything that is going on, I can tell you from this podium, but suffice it to say that we are investing the resources and we are focusing on that particular problem. The question of drones being used to connect people who are incarcerated with people outside, we are taking steps to deal with that, to shut it down, and we are also ensuring that the people who are inside of the prison do less and less in facilitating the immobilizing of equipment which is meant to make the prison a secure place for those who are under law deemed to reside in there. So some of these specific things, and some of them, much of them are not cheap. They all involve significant expenditure. As you may have been told before, it's ongoing. We have an ongoing program of camera installation that is progressing now after a very long period of delays for one reason or the other. That is progressing, and very soon we will be able to report that they're all in place. Some of them are already in use, and others are being installed, and we'll come to that. I didn't mention the development program, but a significant program of activity has to be in response to the condition of our roads. And we are engaging, steps have already been taken and are being taken, to engage from here on in, as we were before, because I talked to you before the elections on this, and the cynicism would have taken over and say, oh, it's an election gimmick, election coming, so we're going to be paving roads. I want to assure you that this is not, the election has come and gone. Another one is due in 2025, but the road reinstatement and rehabilitation program is being ramped up. And one of the areas that we were looking to see where the problems are and why we couldn't go as fast as we want to go, one of the things that we discussed, we discovered, is that the government's role in producing crushed rock from national quarries had been quite substandard. And as a matter of fact, you would have seen a few weeks ago where one of the main operations in national quarries came to a halt, where the staff, the company literally shut itself down. And when we examined those situations, what we found were unacceptable areas of management and financing and relationships with contractors and so on. So we had to revamp and renew the entire process. As a result of that, we have appointed a new board in National Quarries this week. Cabinet approved that today, and some very far-reaching action already has begun to take place as of this week, and we expect that the result of that will be, as we have dealt with Lake Asphalt to prepare and have available a sustained supply of bitumen, which at one time that was the hold-up. Now, various grades of crushed rock, which is required for road building and road maintenance, that would be available, and we expect to have engaged most, if not all, of the local companies that are suited and interested in getting involved in road paving and road reinstatement. So the work continues. This morning I was told that there are 80 projects now, immediately, already in the system. We now have a system where you can't just invite tender and award a contract the day after. There are built-in periods of delay in the new system. The new procurement legislation has with it built-in systems of delay, where you have to wait for a certain number of days to do X, then a certain number of days to do Y, and even a certain number of days for a standstill where you virtually do nothing, and then you can't award the contract for another 30 days. By the time you add up all of these days and days and days, what you have is a sustained period of delay. But that's what the law calls for. That's what agencies are going to have to follow. So we're doing that, but we have a number of projects in the pipeline making their way through these systems, and we have very many more to come, because the intention is to have a very prominent, prioritized road reinstatement program. We spent a lot of time discussing the whole question of when and how we would proclaim the local government legislation to bring about the various changes that that legislation will bring. Suffice it to say that we agreed that the step-by-step arrangement is what it's going to be. And the transitional period, we are already into that. And it is now would be for the local government bodies on a proclamation which will come sometime in a not too distant future. The local bodies will then respond to what the law calls for. But there needs to be a little more time for local bodies to prepare to receive these responsibilities as they are embodied in that legislation that gives them this more authority and so on. And of course, that is a matter that will involve excuse me, the public service in very many ways, and it would depend on people's attitude to a certain extent. Those who believe that it can be done and be done smoothly, I think we get better results. Those who believe that it is not something they want to engage in will find all kinds of reasons not to make do with what the law calls for, or find excuses for not doing things. But we believe that that's only going to be part of a phase that we'll go through, and in the end, we will get over it and get smooth sailing. So the local government reform exercises are to be brought on in a transitional way. In some instances, and in other instances, they will be brought on in a very dramatic way when the law is proclaimed. So we're now working on when that proclamation should take place against a background of how ready the various corporations are. A simple matter like collecting the London building taxes. The corporations have to put themselves in a position to collect that tax, and the Minister of Finance will put provisions in place for them to collect and hold it and use it, and all of that is new. So we expect that there might be one or two teething problems, but the least that we can do is make sure that adequate preparation is in place to handle what flows from there. We discussed also after presentation from the Ministry of Energy what the government has done, what was successful to us, what we are doing. As you know, we are very close to inking in the restructuring of the Atlantic LNG business. We did engage in negotiations for a number of years with the principals in that. After we did announce that we had agreed on the restructuring, it took the lawyers a number of months to convert the agreement into legal documents to bring it about. I can tell you that the teams have done significant work pushed by the Office of the Energy Minister and the Office of the Prime Minister, and we are very close now to the inking of that restructuring, and I'm looking forward to it being done before the end of this year. So you'll be advised when that will take place, probably, if not here in Trinidad, somewhere in Europe, either in Amsterdam or in London, where much of our discussions have taken place. But I'm anxiously awaiting that legal sign-off on that. As the Ministry of Energy reported, one of the reports was the tremendous amount of effort that we have put in trying to ensure that we do have a sustained gas supply in this country. As you know, we have installed capacity of approximately 4 billion cubic feet of gas, but now we're only using on a daily basis in the order of 2.7, 2.8 billion cubic feet. And we have spent a lot of time and initiated new policies to assist us in, firstly, sustaining that level, the reduced level that we are living on now, and also looking towards increasing that supply of gas by doing things within our border, on our border, and across our border. Many of you are familiar with what we've done with respect to the Dragon field and the Loran Manatee field. I can tell you that in both instances, we are still alive, in some cases alive and well, as in the case of Manatee. The Manatee project is sanctioned and is well on the way. We're over 27% of the on-border gas. We're taking steps to have that gas come to us as early as it can engineeringly come to us. And of course with Dragon, that has been a huge diplomatic boulder we've been pushing up a hill since 2018. But I think we have made some considerable progress. And hopefully, as we move into 2024, we are optimistic that we might be able to work our way out of the strictures on the Dragon matter. And of course, our own deep water operations here and the companies that are operating within Trinidad and Tobago. We discussed the whole issue of how much more we can do to encourage interest in the small pools that have been left behind in headier days, and also what tax incentives that might be out there that can cause our partners in the business to want to do what they haven't been doing before. Because we are now using aged fields and small pools and depleted fields and in some instances untested areas, we have to do so much more now to stay in the same place. And we are committed to doing that. And you would see some of that in some of the decisions that will come to you in the near future. Well, those are some of the kinds of things that we have been engaging between Monday night and Wednesday midday. And as I said, there were 50 areas covering every single ministry that we did some report and review on. And one or two decisions, new decisions, would flow from that. So the budget is due. The next week or two we'll see intense activity with respect to preparations for the budget, and sometime in early October, I leave that for the Minister of Finance to give you that information, except to say that by law we have to get the budget out of the Parliament by the end of October. So that should give you an idea of the timetable you're working with. But against that background, I'm going to be out of the country I'm leading a team to the United Nations General Assembly. There are a number of very important meetings taking place. As you know, I have not been going to this UNGA every year. I've only been there once as Prime Minister, and that was in 2019 at the height of our Venezuela problem, and I had to go there and state our case as publicly as I could. A lot of water has flowed under the bridge since, and now we are in the chair. Trinidad and Tobago is chairing the United Nations General Assembly, which has been a huge diplomatic success for Trinidad and Tobago. We put our candidate out. We were confident that we could get the rest of the world to agree and support us, and it was better than we expected. We thought we would have had to fight for it, and we were ready for the fight, but in the end we got it unanimously. It is one of the biggest successes that Trinidad and Tobago has ever had diplomatically, and it ought not to be taken lightly. When you look at the map of the world, you can hardly find Trinidad and Tobago on any scale, because we are a dot on the globe. And to sit in the chair of the United Nations General Assembly is something that Trinidad and Tobago's children should take note of and feel proud about. And up there you would have also heard that at that same UN, we now talk about United Nations accepting the steel pan, having a day, steel pan day. This again was a proposal put to the United Nations by Trinidad and Tobago, confident that we could encourage enough people to agree. And once again, we got no pushback, because our chips are higher than we think. So we shouldn't be selling ourselves short on matters of this nature. And one of the policies that we have taken is that Trinidad and Tobago will continue to maintain a high profile in diplomacy and matters of an international nature where we do have significant interests. And that is why we are maintaining our presence and our involvement in some of these high-level meetings at the UN. So accompanying me to this meeting in New York would be the Minister of Health, where, as you know, the next big issue is how countries deal with the next pandemic. And the Bacchanal has already started on that one as to the role of the WHO vis-a-vis the authority of states to make decisions on this nature. And then the Minister of Planning and Development is also accompanying me because the UN is having some high-level meetings on the whole question of the development goals, specific development goals that all countries are required to get engaged in and to work towards. And also there's another minister who's accompanied, 3 ministers, Planning and Development, Health, and Foreign Affairs. The Foreign Affairs Minister is there as well, because he's going to play a significant role in the whole thrust of small island development states, speaking loudly and holding our ground against this whole question of how we manage and pay for climate change. Who's going to pay and who's being affected? So these 3 ministries have significant business at the United Nations. And I will be speaking next week, Thursday, sometime in the afternoon, after the presentation, the opening on Tuesday. My slot is sometime on Thursday. I'm also going to be meeting with Shell on Monday, taking the opportunity to have some briefings from some of the discussions that we've been having abroad with them. And so we have a very active week in New York, and Trinidad and Tobago has a very high profile there because we are in the presidency. So having said those little things to you, maybe you might have 1 or 2 little things to say to me. Yes, Anthony.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. First question is, was there any card playing at the retreat?
Oh, yes. Cards were played at 9 o'clock in the night. You must have been one of those.
Reshuffling of the deck.
Oh, yeah. Shuffle all the time, but you know, it doesn't matter. It's the same cards you have to use. You have aces, you have kings, you have jacks. And of course, you know, there are smaller cards that are very important. They're all trumps.
A little more direct. In light of the speculation of a potential cabinet reshuffle following the retreat, what would you tell the population about whether that is so or not so?
Well, let me put it this way, right? I have noticed that our media has a way of taking its news from social media. So, social media mean anybody. So anybody could get up and announce a reshuffle. And the media comes running to me asking me, when is the reshuffle? I really don't like being moved by the arbitrariness of social media. I can tell you that I gave no signal to anyone that there'll be any reshuffle. Because you see, the government that I lead, if you notice something, as Prime Minister, I had the option of appointing every member of the cabinet as Prime Minister at some time during our term. One Prime Minister did that. That was their style. So every Monday or every Thursday, once the Prime Minister was leaving the country, another member of the cabinet was given the opportunity to put on their CV that they acted as Prime Minister. I have not done that. Maybe it's because I'm PNM. I have a great respect for and belief in stability. So since I have been Prime Minister, one senior minister has acted as Prime Minister in my absence. What that does, it allows the government to not lose pace and to not lose course or lose track because the Prime Minister is not in the country. The government functions because that's stability. And given the huge difficulties that we were facing between 2015 and now, I could not have the luxury of instability because of the decision-making that had to be made. Stability had great currency and great value. Secondly, I think I may have reshuffled the cabinet, was it twice? In the 8-year period? Must have been twice. And on each occasion, there were significant moves. I have been in public life in the government. I served in a number of cabinets. I could tell you, reshuffling for reshuffling's sake does not improvement make. Because whenever you reshuffle the cabinet, rest assured that while some people, few people, may accelerate their performance, the majority of people have a learning curve before they can start running again. Especially, and I'm saying this against the background, and I'm not here casting aspersions on our public servants. But one of the difficulties that we have at this period, and I hope it changes as time goes forward. When I first served in a cabinet, the very first cabinet I served in, there were 3 people in that cabinet who had prior cabinet experience. One was the Prime Minister, the other was Wendell Motley, and the other was John Eckstein. Everybody else were brand new to the cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago. And the population might take it for granted that we did survive as a cabinet and do very good work, including, which you all know make reference to, from the Manning era. But we were only able to do that in the way it was done because of the quality of the public service that existed at that time, permanent secretary level. There were a large number of very experienced and confident public servants who provided the government with the guidance that a new government of that nature needed. Otherwise, it could have been quite different. Since then, there has been a huge changeover in the public service. I don't know if members of the media pay attention to how the public, people retire at a particular age. And when they move out, I don't know if you're all paying attention to who moves in. And the system changes. So when you have a system where you've had a huge changeover, you've got to be careful that you don't pretend that you have what you don't have. Because sometimes it takes time. That learning curve I talk about, I've been there, I know it. So I'm not a Prime Minister who will reshuffle to appease somebody on social media who's saying it's time for a reshuffle. I'd rather have a minister do more with something that he or she knows more about now, and let's get on with the job. That is not to say that the occasion may not or will not or should not arise that the Prime Minister should make changes in the cabinet. And finally, I will say this. Many of the changes that have been made in prior cabinets have been done as a result of specific actions, sometimes scandals, which require adjustments because vacancies have been created. I am pleased to announce that the government that I have led have had one such situation that didn't occur in the government that I led. The only requirement to fill a vacancy in the cabinet that I led as a result of a scandal or removal of a person, we had the death of Franklin Khan and we had the arrest of Marlene MacDonald, both of which were beyond my control. The Marlene MacDonald matter related to 2 governments before me. It was something that is alleged to have happened in the Manning government. There were investigations then, and the matter was put to bed. Under the subsequent government, there was no action there. While I was Prime Minister and she was in my cabinet, it was said that there was new information and the police took action. That was beyond me. And of course, the tragic loss of my colleague Frankie Khan, we had to. So when those things happen, you have no choice. But in terms of choosing to have a reshuffle, I was informed of that by you.
But he fired
Who?
Darrell Smith.
Yeah, but Darrell Smith's firing, I mean, I saw something in the papers today, right? I have since sought legal advice because much of what I saw in the papers have nothing to do with me. I see it in the court where I am supposed to have done certain things. I just caution people. It have nothing to do with me. And for the benefit of the public, let me just say this, because I like to keep the public well informed of the government I lead and the facts surrounding me and my action. As Prime Minister, I took action against a minister for interfering with the work of a permanent secretary, as that permanent secretary conducted public service business. And for the benefit of the public, I say again, all the actions I took against Darrell Smith, none of it had anything to do with any sexual harassment allegation in front of me. And I say no more. And finally, I don't even want to say, I have seen no court order, so I can't comment on that at the moment. I only see what I see in the papers. And when I saw it in the papers, I have since sought legal advice to guide my actions on a matter which clearly has different interpretations. Yes?
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Cameron Fletcher, Guardian Media Limited. It's a Guardian Media Limited. Cameron Fletcher.
Cameron.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
While we understand that you may not want to just respond or appease to the social media based on a cabinet reshuffle, there has been a cry from the public for a change in Minister of National Security. And you mentioned that, discussed in the retreat, there was a mention of high level of crime. So you are aware of the level of crime. Wasn't there any discussions or to change the Minister of National Security? Or are you pleased with his performance?
A reshuffle is not something that comes about as a discussion. Because of the responsibility that the Prime Minister has, Prime Ministers guard that authority very jealously. So one doesn't go to a retreat to discuss a reshuffle. We discuss the elements of the portfolios, and yes, we did that. But while we were in Chagaramas, we did not discuss the reshuffle.
We will discuss his performance.
We discussed the portfolio and the issues surrounding the requirements of the portfolio, successes and failures, things to do, and people to get. So it's not. Again, I saw in the newspapers that we are going, but that was just people being, you know, as Jamaicans will say, previous.
So are you pleased with the performance of the Minister of National Security?
Well, the performance of the Minister of National Security, there are some people who are less pleased with my own performance. I can tell you one thing. There's no minister in the cabinet against whom more call is made for his removal than me. So, understand? I understand where it comes from and I understand how it goes, but I also understand the work that is being done.
And speaking about the violent crimes, even while during the past 3 days you were there and you were in discussions, we saw violent crimes taking place. We are seeing lots of anger. We're seeing cousin killing cousin, friend killing friend. I mean, in response to that, and I know you mentioned the relationship with the United States and you say things are moving along, but what is being done now by the government to address that?
Well, some of those crimes that make the news and help us to be traumatized, you have to understand that until they happen, we don't know they're going to happen. I take it that you're talking about a member of a family who killed another member of a family with a divider, a compass. Now, how does one put that in the scheme of things. Did anybody in this country anticipate that? Do you think anybody in that family anticipated that? I'm sorry to say, but when that happens, we have to come to the conclusion that we are a violent society. Could that not have been avoided? Look at what all of us facing today. I don't know the person who was killed, but I felt. I mean, I know a compass, and for that to be a killing tool, who are we? Why is this happening? Every killing you see that you have to cover in your daily routine and in media, it's a murderer out there. It might be a murderer committing more than one murder, but he or she is somebody's son or daughter, is somebody's brother, is somebody's husband, is somebody's boyfriend, is somebody's neighbor. They didn't come from Mars. So when we keep just dealing with this issue, talking about the Prime Minister and the Minister of National Security, we are missing a huge bullseye. It is no, I don't want to say it's extremism, but could it not have been that was a quarrel, a simple quarrel in the family, resulted in somebody being killed with a compass? There was somebody who was killed with a stone sometime early on. There was a time when I was growing up, killing was done by a cutlass. So as the killing items become more efficient, like the guns that are being used now, the assault weapons, where you're killing 2s and 4s and 6s, this killing is not a ministerial thing. Our job is to try and prevent the killing tools from being available and from giving people options.
Prime Minister Sheila Ramsugal from the Trinidad Express. So just to clarify on the issue of Darrell Smith, no directive was given to the Office of the Prime Minister by the High Court to reveal the report on the allegations of sexual...
I have not seen a court order, so I can't comment on it. You probably would have seen it because you published it. What I could say to you, I have checked with my office, with my lawyer, and as far as I am aware, I, as Prime Minister, I was not a party to any proceedings in the court.
Another question. Has the government come to a date for budget as yet?
I told you earlier on that we closed it because we must go through the Parliament by October. We're now in mid-September, and I told you the Minister of Finance will speak to that in the very near future. It usually is the Minister of Finance who would announce the budget there, and I want to keep that tradition.
Prime Minister, you mentioned about the Dragon Field, that it's like pushing a boulder up a hill. Are you confident that eventually the boulder will get over the hill?
Well, I'm confident that the efforts that we're making are getting us closer and closer to the top of the hill. We've made a lot of effort. I must tell you, you talk about the Minister of National Security. I can talk about the Minister of Energy, who has literally been doing shuttle work between Washington, Port of Spain, and Caracas. And that was necessary because that's what it's called for. And we stay engaged. We continue to be engaged. We crossed some hurdles. We overcame some challenges. We still have a few in front of us, but I don't want to say I'm confident because the decision is not mine. And the decision may have other antecedents and other agendas. But I'm saying that I'm sure that we're not wasting our time.
What is a major hurdle at this point? Till the issue of paying for the natural gas?
Yeah, the mechanism of payment is the main hurdle that we're dealing with. So Trinidad and Tobago has had to work overtime in converting squares into circles. To do that, we've had to you know, build relationships, we've had to find friends, we've had to, you know, talk to people to see our point of view. I mean, I myself have been involved directly in this matter. I've been seeking to influence people on our behalf. It has not been easy, but that's what the job calls for.
Do you think it would be useful if Venezuela was seen to have free and fair elections?
Free and fair elections. I don't want to bring Venezuelan elections into this discussion for the simple reason that it was not our original equation, and these things in today's world, we are, I should say unfortunately, reevaluating even the concept of democracy is now under reevaluation and review in quarters that we never dreamt it would be. And even at the bastions of democracy, the question now is whither goes democracy? And all we have to do is to ensure that the principles that we subscribe to, both at home and abroad, are principles that we genuinely believe in, and then that would allow us to treat with all circumstances.
On the issue of democracy, what's become of the contentions in Tobago? Referring, of course, to your issues with the Chief Secretary and lawsuits and whistleblowers and...
What was that? The gentleman, that matter is in the court. I mean, on its way to the court, I should say, because I did issue a pre-action protocol to the gentleman who I saw in the assembly telling stories about his relationship with me. I did in fact ask him to retract his position, and you know how these things go. You issue a pre-action protocol and you wait. The person asked for time, we gave them time, and then the person came back saying that they have privilege. So that matter is on its way to the court.
Prime Minister, I'm sure the issue of Caribbean Airlines would have been brought up during you.
Actually, it didn't make the hit parade on there.
What about the West Indies?
Cricket? While I did meet with some cricketers, not too much cricket was discussed. I met with a couple of cricketers on another score as a sidebar. But inside of the retreat, we didn't discuss cricket. But if one talks about the generalities of engaging our young people in productive engagements, cricket falls in there, because as you would see, one of the things that we have to look at in going forward, especially in the role that Trinidad and Tobago could play and the opportunities we can give to our young people in a world where hugely profitable opportunities can come their way if their talents are harnessed and developed early, is the whole question of operationalizing the Brian Lara Academy. The Brian Lara Stadium, as it is there, was meant to be an academy. It has been used as a cricket ground, hosting matches which have been quite successful. But the concept of the academy has never been operationalized. And that's one of the discussions that we would look at going forward, both for our own people at home and for the regional development of the game as well. And there are other interests along those lines. So our future is full of interesting possibilities.
Just a follow-up to Anthony's question concerning the Dragon deal. Has Venezuela's state oil company been seeking any sort of payment from either Shell or NGC or any aspect of the deal?
I don't want to go into the elements of these discussions because they are really parties at the onset bind themselves to non-disclosure. So you have to bear with me on that, right? There will come a time when maybe that kind of information will be out. But right now, I don't want to comment on the innards of the discussions because we do have a commitment. The government, Shell, PDVSA, we all have a non-disclosure. Because, and you can understand how this goes, that's typical business arrangement. Non-disclosure and keeping confidences until something has gelled.
Yeah, Prime Minister, earlier in the press conference, in the news conference, you said the economy remains heavily dependent on energy. You've been in office 8 years now, 8 years last month. Are you satisfied that the government has done enough to diversify the revenues of the country away from energy?
Well, whatever figure you come up with, wherever you find it, that will not be enough. We always will have more to do. But we did make considerable efforts to strengthen our non-oil earnings. And some of those efforts have borne good fruit. And that is why when we look at the performance of the economy today, you can see a greater contribution from the non-oil sector. But you cannot get away from the fact that given what we have available to us now, the best revenue stream that we can anticipate or have is the revenue stream that can be provided from the oil sector. Even though oil and gas sector and petrochemical sector, even though they have been providing sustenance to us for a long time, they remain the best options for stable and increased revenues going forward. So what we have done is to maximize our take from those areas while creating opportunities for additional revenue stream. Very soon I'm having to open the brand new Phoenix Park Industrial Park. That is one of the major developments in non-oil where we are aiming to boost manufacturing for export with foreign investment leading the way in a brand new industrial park. You would have seen us encouraging certain kinds of businesses into the country. You would have seen the growth of our financial sector. You would have seen the amount of effort that has gone in to the Ministry of Youth Development. That's a brand new ministry, Ministry of Youth Development and National Service, where we have thousands of young people that we are upskilling to find a way to produce, to participate, to accept opportunity in the agricultural sector. Right? We have to admit some element of failure in the tourism sector, because by now, the Sandals project in Tobago should have been operating. And we still believe what a wonderful situation it would have been if Tobago had a Sandals and a beaches project. Because what that would have done, more than anything else, would have been to bring airlift into Tobago and make Tobago a destination based on Sandals' international standard advertisement. If you notice, if you look at a Sandals ad anywhere in the world, in the Midwest, in America, in Scotland, anywhere, it says Sandals. And as long as you had a Sandals project in your country, that was you advertising there. But for reasons best known to others, that was undermined and the family left us without it. But I can tell you, now, as it was before COVID, during COVID and now, from the Bahamas all the way down to Grenada, significant chunks of their booming economy, where it is booming, is based on the Sandals model. That's what it is. And we have to accept defeat in Tobago that we didn't get that because, nobody was happy being treated the way they were treated here. And they decided we didn't need that. And we lost it. But there are other options that we are pursuing, and we hope that those will bear fruit. Yes, and Jules.
Just wondering, just in terms of the budget, one or two things. One, in terms of the price of fuel at the pump, given the government's policy, in terms of if oil prices are lower, that there may be some adjustment downwards at the pump, depending. We've not seen that so far. Is that something that could happen in the new financial year?
Well, what we did say is that we would look at the prices at the end of each month, and if it is significantly different to the previous, to going into the new month, if it is significantly different to the last month, we will then use that as a basis. But if you look at the prices, it has been very volatile. Oil prices have been very volatile, and in fact, even as we did not have the opportunity to say, well, look, the price has gone down significantly, so bring down the price, we really are better off when the price is up, you know. And the projections now, I think the projections now is for oil at what, $82? And even as it is oscillating on a daily, weekly basis, it has largely been in the ballpark of where we pitched it. And it is still carrying an element of significant subsidy. Probably 1.4, 1.5, 1.3 billion dollars, which is not to be sneezed at. But if it drops down to $60 or $50 or even $72 as the stable price across the oscillations, well, then we could say, well, all right, the price has dropped, so you can bring it down. But it has not really fallen. I've seen people say, no, the price has come down. Because if we didn't say we're going to just do what normally happens in some other countries, where the price moves immediately, right? It goes up today, goes down this evening, goes up today, goes down this evening, because that's how. But in those environments, there's no subsidy. And there's a tax. Not only is there no subsidy, but there's a tax on the product as a major revenue winner. We don't have that here in Trinidad and Tobago. The government still carries a big element of subsidy, even if the price dropped by $2 or $3 for a day or so, or a week or so. Right? Yes.
Coming back to the Brown Lamar Academy, we've been hearing talks about that for about 6 years now. How far in the discussions are we reaching, and what would the scope of that academy look like? And let me put in my other question quickly.
The vision of the creation of the Brown Lamar Academy, it really is supposed to be a school. It wasn't just meant to be a place where you go and have a match between professional players. It was supposed to be a place where you nurture the talent in cricket and they get their education at cricket. And cricket be a major part of the curriculum at that academy. That was the vision. That is what has not been operationalized. And the demand for it becomes greater and greater as the cricketing world is now a major sporting business, creating huge opportunities for individuals and nations. And secondly, West Indies cricket has declined precipitously in recent times, and there's a role for governments to prevent West Indies cricket from becoming obsolete. So the question now is this not the time for the academy to be operationalized to realize its promise?
You mentioned about drones, Sonalala TDT News. You mentioned about shutting down drones in the prisons and so on. How soon can we expect this?
As soon as the technology allows us to do it, we will do it. We're working on that.
In terms of the sea bridge, there have been issues with the cargo stock going down, and Tobago has been complaining about shortages, especially in building materials, etc. Did that come during the retreat?
Not specifically, because that problem has been solved. You see, we have to understand that there will be days when things don't go right in your own private life. You get up in the morning, you're not feeling well, right? But you don't judge your course of your life from that. Sometimes, and let me just say this, as Prime Minister of the country, sometimes there are people in this country who are unreasonable. But it's we people, it's we, but they're unreasonable. We have a cargo vessel that goes to Tobago on a daily basis, taking all the cargo that can go to Tobago. That is to be good thing. So you didn't, before the fire on the Cabo Star, you were not hearing anything about cargo going to Tobago. And then one day, there's an accident on the boat is on the way to Tobago, and there's a fire on the boat. I am yet to meet the person who will tell me, if I was in office, or if I was in the ministry, that fire would not take place. I have not met that person yet, but that person exists. Immediately that emergency occurred, it created a new situation. One, first and foremost, life and limb, nobody was hurt. Secondly, the boat was taken out of service. So we now don't have the Cabo Star to go to Tobago. But in our service to Tobago, we immediately, not the next week or the next year, immediately we had an increase in the number of trips that the fast ferries were making. But of course, there's some cargo that they can't carry. But they could carry more of the smaller cargo. We put the galleon passage into service because the link between Port of Spain and Scarborough is served by the Cabo Star, the Spirit, the Galleon Passage, the Bucco Reef, and the APT James. I don't know any inter-island connection anywhere in the Caribbean that has a connection like that, serviced by that level, 5 pieces of expensive equipment. But the fire on the vessel created a new situation: 1, immediacy; 2, short term; 3, repairs to the Cabo Star, and back in service, and we back to normal. Why are we behaving so? Why are we behaving like that? As if it should never have happened. And it didn't. It happened because I heard from Tobago, because the central government didn't do this, and the central government didn't do that. We are sensible people. That fire on the boat could easily have been worse. I don't know the conditions, but a fire on a boat is a serious matter. The bottom line is, fire put out, people come off the boat come out of service, and we are told that the boat is being repaired. If it takes 3 weeks, a month, I don't know that there's anybody who will tell me that if I was there, I could have repaired it in 2 days. That person exists. But the bottom line is, the reality is, we are doing what is required to restore the situation, including bringing, just for a short period, another piece of equipment that will do more than the Galleon Passage can do, that will do more than the APT James can do, so that bulk cargo like construction material can go to Tobago. People, are we so impatient that we can't understand what has happened, but we must be blaming somebody and behaving as though if I was there, that wasn't going to happen? You spoil it there with that. And then, of course, there are these opportunists who will jump in on every opportunity to give you the impression that the sky is falling. The sky is not falling. The sky is nice and bright. Tobago is as beautiful as ever, and we are going to get back to normal in a matter of a few days. As soon as the Cabo Star is repaired and certified, we're back in business. What's the story?
What is the situation with I.A.N Energy? Is that a squabble among family members, or is it a fundamental issue?
When you say family members, what do you mean?
The government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago has a shareholding in I.A.N. It's preference shares, but it is a shareholding.
Let me put it this way, right? I.A.N and the government cooperated to introduce into our economy some element of economic expansion. That is a singular basis on which the government was involved with I.A.N, a private business. Right? And in so doing, the government would have assisted in every way possible to see that I.A.N becomes successful. That's the long and the short of that. But at the end of the day, public interest and private interest may not converge. Right? So what you're seeing there is I.A.N telling the court what the government did and what the government didn't do. But the government's story is that when circumstances required, the government assisted And of course, there's a Jamaican song that I could sing, but I'm not going to sing it here now. You know Peter Tosh song, right? Sorry for Marga Dog turned around and bite you?
Yes.
Right. Let's go.
Prime Minister, there's been a call from the President on Monday for government and opposition to unite when it comes to legislation to combat crime. And are there any plans to sit down with the opposition soon?
We sit down with the opposition all the time. We sit in the parliament. There's government, there's opposition. And I want to say something to you all, because I like the local media, but you all do not do any research and you all do not review. As opposition leader, I didn't wait for people to tell me to cooperate with the government. I saw that as a responsibility to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So as opposition leader, I voted for the budget that the government brought to the parliament in 2015. Remember that? You forget that? It is the only time that the opposition voted for the government's budget. Because I saw it as a new beginning. There were other budgets I didn't vote for, because by the time they got going, they better get out of the way. Because we didn't see much eye to eye on that. But the demonstration of my ability to put the public interest first is there in 2015. I voted and took my team and we voted for the budget. Never happened before. Secondly, when I became Prime Minister, I reached out to the opposition leader and set about thinking that I could have an arrangement where we will meet in mutual respect. I don't have to tell you that one of the problems that we have in the country is a total lack and loss of respect. Right? And as a result of that, after that first meeting, the way that first meeting went just made quite clear that future meetings were not on and they would serve no useful purpose. But in the parliament, there's provision. And the government is quite willing to use all the provisions. As a matter of fact, having heard the opposition leader speak on Monday, I intend to write to her and to ask her to supply or to receive personnel from the government on the issue of crime, and the government will receive from her side on the issue of crime, and let us see what common ground exists that the parliament can deal with. Because it's all well and good to say this and say that, but when the rubber hits the road, you look to see what direction the traffic is going in. And nobody could point the finger in my direction saying that I have not indicated and done more than indicate that if there is opportunity for collaboration, we are not of the view that the only way we can win an election is to be obstinate or to undermine. We came from opposition 33-3, and the next election we won the election. 29-12, the next election the PLM won it. So we don't condition ourselves in that we have to undermine or pull down or bartalk or not cooperate to win an election. We can win an election, if that is the issue, when things are going well. Because there's good, there's better, and there's best. But there are some people who believe that the only way they can prevail in the polling environment at the polls is to ensure that it's a world of grievance and you bartalk everything. Because if you mistake and say everything is going, something is going right, the government will get the benefit and the government will remain in office. We don't subscribe to that. You would have seen recently when we got the Moody's report. If that Moody's report was negative, it would have been the premier conversation of our political opponents. Confirmation that the economy collapsed, which is their mantra. Confirmation, you know who says so? Moody's says so. But Moody's gave quite an encouraging report about Trinidad and Tobago. And you know what they say? That don't matter. And some of them went as far as to say that we enticed Moody to say that. That's the kind of thing where we sell ourselves short. We are a modern nation that should do better than that, and there are too many schools and too many universities in Trinidad and Tobago for that kind of rubbish to be the national conversation. So when you call on people to work together, my hand was up already. Right? And of course, you know, the Parliament, in a Westminster system, the Parliament is a place where parliamentarians, there's cut and thrust of the politics, of course, but the proof of the pudding is whether those parliamentarians, in the cut and thrust of politics, within the standing order of the Parliament, put the public interest first. You understand? You saw what happened. We talked a while ago about Dragon and Venezuela and how important that decision is. That stone pushing up the hill. How important it is to Trinidad and Tobago. What was the opposition's position on that? Tell me, you all covered it. Tell me, what was the position? They broke rank with the government of Trinidad and Tobago and supported the Americans installing President Guaido. Remember President Guaido had the support of the opposition in Trinidad and Tobago. Venezuelan people migrating to our country. We kept our doors open for as long as we could. Gave them registration and gave them aid and succor. Registered 16,000 of them. And when a few of them drowned off the Venezuelan beach, the opposition joined with people to criticize the government for Venezuelans who drowned in Venezuela, attempting to come into Trinidad and Tobago illegally. So don't tell me about cooperating when you have people like that unpatriotic and undermining our effort. You understand? I hope you understand.
On the issue of Venezuelans, do you have a view on a Venezuelan woman representing Trinidad and Tobago in some beauty pageant?
Yes, I would.
Would you share it with the nation?
Gregory McBurney from Newsday. McBurney.
You're new to that?
Well, no, not new to journalism, new to Newsday, but not new to. You mentioned earlier that one of the things that was discussed at the retreat was the economy and where adjustments could be made to policies, which ones could be ramped up and which ones could be cut. I know you spoke about the rural rehabilitation being ramped up. Are there any significant policies that are going to be cut or reduced greatly?
Again, I don't want to speak for the Minister of Finance, but if there are programs that are seen to have outlived their usefulness, I would expect that the Minister of Finance will target them for pruning. That's just good management. But what we're aiming to do is what we have done since 2015, to maintain the gains we have made. Even in a difficult situation, we have been successful in maintaining most of the gains that we have made. And that is the assignment that the government has. Because if you don't make certain decisions, they can have the ones that you make, because it's always a choice. There are options. If you take the wrong options or don't make certain decisions because they are too hard to make, then you could find the quality of life for a broad cross-section of the people of this country can very quickly be reversed. And let me give you one example. It's still part of the national conversation that the government closed down the oil refinery at Point-de-Pierre. That rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, but fortunately the majority of people saw it for what it was. That did come up. and we did examine it at the retreat. What if we had not taken the refinery out of business and removed the requirement to buy oil and refine it at point of pay, losing between $5 and $7 a barrel, 120,000 barrels a day, much of it paid for by the Treasury. Suppose we had not done that. August 2018, a date that has come and passed, August 2018, there was a check to be written for $850 million US, which the government did not have, and which the company could not service. Suppose we had not taken that decision, what was the outcome? We discussed that. You know what the outcome would have been? The worst of it would have been default. And you will know, if you default on one loan, everybody else who you owe money, call for the money one time. That's called cross default. Part of the conditions of borrowing. And any country that finds itself in that situation, that's what we call a failed state. When you default like that, because there are things you can do to avoid that catastrophe. And the first thing is, when you see it coming, head for the IMF, the lender of last resort, and the IMF will lend you the money to ensure that you don't default. But the IMF will tell you what you can spend money on from here on in while you are in an IMF program. And we were steering that. But I had told this country from the very beginning, I gave a commitment that we will not be in an IMF program, and we have things to do to evade that, and we will make our own prescriptions and take our own medicine. One of those prescriptions was to close the refinery. And you could imagine, if we didn't go as far as default, what about downgrade? Because if you have a debt that you can't service like that, or you're struggling with, who's going to lend you money? And of course, you know, the more you struggle, the poorer you are, the higher is your interest rate. Would you believe that Trinidad and Tobago is now borrowing at the best interest rate in the region? Our ability to borrow, only this week, we borrowed at the best rate, better than virtually anybody else in the region, including all of South America. Because those who are lending see us as good prospects who can repay, because we have evaded. You think, Anthony, you like to write on the economics of this country and the business of this country. Had we not dealt with that restructuring in Petrotrin, you think we could have been borrowing at the basis points you're borrowing now? No. It would have been the opposite. We'd have been borrowing at the highest rate. The difference between 6% and 12% is hundreds of millions of dollars per year, you know. You borrow $4 billion, and I am paying 4% more than you. You know what that is? That is hundreds of millions of dollars in difference if you can borrow at all. Because once the commercial lenders don't want to lend you, whether you want to go to the IMF or not, you have to go. But we stayed away from that by taking the medicine. And the medicine we take had a little bit of flavor to it. 5,000 workers directly, and of course they were the indirect ones who were supporting the industry. Those 5,000 workers, they went home with $2.7 billion. And about almost 2,000 of them have got back jobs between Paria and Heritage. So it's not our loss. And we have been working since to ensure that we, keep Heritage in exploration, keep contractors in the field. So we have not come out of the oil business, but we've changed the model. And of course, the first option to our government finding itself on that road is the option that we were given early in our tenure. Devalue the currency. Devalue the currency, 8 to 1, 10 to 1. That would have allowed the government to get more Trinidad and Tobago dollars for each US dollar. But it wasn't going to give us a single additional US dollar. But of course, the book like this that you were buying for $5 before the devaluation, the same book will cost $12. And you think you're better off? Public servants who live on government salaries. What is their position in a devaluation? So you see, people who don't have to make decisions, they could talk all kinds of stories because there's no proof of the pudding day for them. But a government, every government action, a day of reckoning shall come.
Prime Minister, any hope of selling the Point-de-Paix refinery?
Well, we put it out there. Refineries are hard to sell because the refining business worldwide is not a business that, especially nowadays where there's a huge conversation and modern conversation, a huge growth of policy where expanding your reach into petrochemicals, hydrocarbon fuels is not what it is. In our Texaco days, that was big business. Once you're in oil, I mean, growth, the sky is the limit. Now they are encouraging you to get out of it. Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana and Suriname, at the international podium, wherever we are, we have to keep making the case that we have to be allowed to continue to exploit our resources because there are people who could influence us in more ways than one, trying to encourage us to come out of the business because the climate change needed to come out. And we're saying no. As long as you're in it, we'll stay in it.
To change the model from selling to maybe leasing or some other kind of arrangement?
That was available. We made it available without condition. We said if there's any agency or any entity who would like to use a refinery, we have one that is available. No person or entity has come forward with a solid proposal that, saying that, one that we can consider seriously. None. And we're not the only one. There are about 17 refineries around the world that have been closed for years because once you get to that position, you need oil to make a refinery work. And if you don't have oil, right, a refinery is not really the thing you really need. The reason why we closed our refinery is because we did not have enough of our own oil to keep it going. And to keep it going on oil that we were purchasing, the economics were not sound. And we had to take that decision. Otherwise, the whole country could have been facing the kinds of disaster I just described to you, whether it's devaluation, downgrade, or outright bankruptcy. And let me end on this note, because only this morning, once again, the cabinet had to roll over hundreds of millions of dollars of petroleum debt, which is still carrying. The Minister of Finance, and much of that debt had to do with buying oil to refine, to lose money. But that shouldn't bother you. Those problems are only for the government. Let me sorry.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Sheila Ramsbag from the Trinidad Express. And so people on these streets have been expressing a sense of hopelessness with regard to the high cost of living. Is there anything that you could say to them or any plans in the future to assist with this?
Well, they're virtually, I don't know, given where we are as part of the international economy, because Trinidad and Tobago is part of the international economy, I don't know of very many examples where there are low costs of living. Very few. They exist here and there. But the period in which we live and the interconnectivity and interdependence, costs are transferred. Much of the cost of living pressure in Trinidad and Tobago is food costs, because government subsidizes utilities. Because you can imagine if government didn't subsidize utilities, what it would have been if you had to pay the real price for water, for electricity, pay a toll on the road. And there are people who face all those things with no subsidy. Our main driver of inflation is food. So, because so much of our food is imported. And even when we produce local food, the enthusiasm to consume it is not there. So we're trying to encourage that. You see the government's work in the Ministry of Health fighting non-communicable diseases. That fight encourages people to eat local and eat fresh foods as against processed foods. But we eat a lot of processed foods. A lot of the inputs or the food itself is imported and have to be paid for with foreign currency. And in an environment where there's some element of shortage or slow availability of foreign currency, there are upward pressures on prices. So there are a number of things which the government is engaged in, encouraging you to eat more of what you grow, or even grow some more of what you eat. Right, as I told you earlier on, it is not by accident that we have a few thousand young people now encouraging them to produce fresh foods. Encouraging people to go back to things like healthy ground provision. Fresh vegetables, we have some work going on in Shagaramas now and elsewhere in the country where in the coming months you will get some seriously well-produced, high-quality, fresh vegetables. And of course, if we grow them and you don't eat them, there's a problem there. And of course, I saw in the papers today a recommendation to remove VAT. I could tell you, in 2015, we did consider bringing relief to people by way of reduction in VAT. And we did reduce VAT. Remember, VAT used to be 15%? We reduced VAT to 12%. Or was it 12.5? I think it was 12%. Right. I am convinced by the examination that I have done and keeping my eyes and ears on the ground that that made no contribution in the broad sense to the people who were looking for relief. The bulk of that 2% that we took off VAT was kept by those engaged in selling things.
Yeah, but you would admit, Prime Minister, that there is an issue of arrears of VAT.
Much of the people who pocketed the VAT had no arrears to get. Yes, the VAT system is one of pay and collect. Government revenues incorporate the VAT system in it. And the government was carrying significant amounts of debt in VAT, which they keep paying. When COVID came, and acknowledging what you have said there, that the government was carrying these arrears for people, what did we do? We borrowed $3 billion and paid off most of it. Right? And since then, we've been trying to keep that away from the kinds of levels of debt that it was before. But it's a management of the revenue stream. And of course, if we have to pay VAT debt as against paying public servants at the end of the month, what do you think we'll do? Simple as that.
But maybe you
like that point, Prime Minister, in
need to
terms of
reform the
relief.
VAT system as well.
We need to collect the VAT, because the collection of VAT has deteriorated considerably. And that is why, you know, we need to improve our institutional arrangements. Let me put it that way. Because VAT collection is an open secret in this country, where a lot of the VAT that is owed to the state is not collected because the collection system is not efficient. And there's a fair amount of shenanigans that goes on with VAT. You know that. So we try to improve on those things. Yeah, Joel.
Yes, sorry, just right in terms of relief, as Shilan had asked, in terms of the issue of the minimum wage, is the government any closer to a decision on its review of the minimum wage?
Again, I don't want to preempt the Minister of Labour and the Minister of Finance on this, but I would say that we are considering it because, I mean, you see, it's the waterbed effect. Eh? You know, you squeeze one side and the other side bulge. But we really are cognizant that people at the lower end of the earning spectrum need some relief. But that relief, you have to be careful that it doesn't threaten their opportunities. And the best thing that we have been able to do in managing this particular kind of problem is to manage inflation. Keep the value of the dollar in your pocket at a level that it does not become worthless.
I know you mentioned difficulties uniting or working together with the opposition, but would you extend an olive branch to the Chief Secretary, Falia Augustine?
What you interfering Fali for? Fali have more problems than you could deal with. I have, again, I like to be understood for who I am and what I am. I went to Tobago. A new government was in place, made up of young people. Most of them had never managed a foul coup. I called the leader in, and we sat. First time we sat and talked, we didn't talk any business. We just had breakfast like two civilized human beings. That was the first time. I invited him to the Prime Minister's residence, and we had breakfast. And we talked about things in general. The second time, I took a delegation of ministers whose portfolios had some direct contact with Tobago's business. Planning and Development, Attorney General, Minister of Works, Minister of Tourism, and so on. And I sat with them from 12 o'clock until 6 o'clock. Explaining how the Assembly and the central government functions. And basically, that was the relationship. The last time I sat with the Chief Secretary, it was at my request, I called him, and the purpose for that particular meeting was to broach the idea of central government alongside the THA or receiving from the THA or assisting the THA with a development plan for Tobago. So that if we get that development plan and agree on it, and it has the buy-in on both sides, it doesn't matter who is in office in Tobago. When you're in office, you just have to do the job, do the work. But the work is known to all of us. And you had the support of the central government. That's the last time I saw Fali. The next time I saw him, other than that meeting, was in the Assembly, in a special sitting of the Assembly, called specially to advise Tobago that the Prime Minister and the central government is undermining his administration in a huge conspiracy with the Commissioner of Police and my private lawyer. And I have been meeting with some man who, you saw the story. All I can tell you, I haven't gotten over that yet. Because you see, that is probably, and the story is carrying on in Tobago because they keep having meetings trying to defend Tobago from this situation. But as I said earlier on, we are sitting at the General Assembly of the United Nations as the president. But the head of the executive in Tobago at the THA is telling the world that in Trinidad and Tobago, how it go is that the Prime Minister and the Commissioner of Police is undermining the duly elected House of Assembly in Tobago in criminal activity. That is what it is. That was not Tobago's story. That's a story that went worldwide. When I recover from that, I'll let you know. Thank you all very much. Thanks for coming.